So lots of headlines coming out of the two stops this Alberta Next panel has made so far, from Danielle Smith musing about getting the premiers together to open up the Constitution, to people showing up to advocate for separation, even though the province insists Alberta Next is not about that, to Smith facing pushback that the panel exists at all. Janet, based on what we've seen so far, do you think this experience, this process is playing out the way Smith wants it to?
Well, I did watch the Tuesday night, and I just didn't have the energy to watch on Wednesday night. Tuesday night probably played out better for her than Wednesday night, from what I hear. But, I don't exactly know how the Premier expected this to play out. I do think the Premier is sort of almost looking at this as a public engagement a public engagement methodology, that's just meant to give people an opportunity to vent. The anger in Alberta is real. It predates Smith. Maybe you could argue that Smith is fanning the flames, but I think she just senses this frustration, and she's trying to give that constituency an outlet so it doesn't come back to bite her.
Okay, and we'll touch on that a little bit more in a second. But first, Evan, I want your thoughts on the strategy behind these town halls and whether or not you think they're playing out the way Smith was hoping for.
Yeah, I would sort of track the sequencing and like a bit of a differentiation between when Premier Smith and her team first announced the Alberta pension plan benefits and to where it is now. Like, there's an interesting differentiation that I think is important to highlight, which is that there's a real authenticity and like public engagement process here that I think the Premier and her team probably learned a bit of a lesson on the first go around when they announced what they saw as a pretty appetizing benefits under the Alberta pension plan and the way that they saw it. Obviously, that's just one component of these engagement panels. But I think they really want to sort of outline, like, there's big options here for the province to look at, and we want people to be engaged, and they don't want to be seen to be having their thumb on the process. Obviously, the critics will level that criticism towards the government, but I think that's the hope and the design of how these panels have been set up.
Well, speaking of critics, the leader of the opposition is saying that Smith's strategy amounts to a sham, that she's already made it clear that she wants an Alberta pension plan, among other proposals. You touched on the pension plan. This has already been put to Albertans. And Naheed Nenshi also saying the UCP is essentially using these town halls for cover for an outcome that's already predetermined. What do you think of that assertion, Janet?
Well, I think the idea of putting your thumb on the scale, I think it's kind of hard to argue that the thumb is not on the scale. The thumb is definitely on the scale. And I say that as somebody who's not necessarily a critic of this process. Like I said, I think it's a little bit of a steam valve, let people talk about these issues. But, when you watch the videos that they prepared, there's clearly an agenda there. And every video cuts back to a criticism of the federal government. These are not just sort of cold presentations of the facts. They're they can be quite provocative, and they talk about complaints against the federal government. So the scale is definitely there. And when I watched on Tuesday night, everyone on the panel was praising the Premier. The moderator was praising the Premier. This is a forum to make people who feel positively about these ideas good about the fact that they feel positively about them. So the finger is on the scale, and I don't think, but as I said, I'm not necessarily a critic of the Premier doing it. I think it's an interesting political engagement exercise.
You're a pollster. Can I also ask you about the sampling of these people? So Calgary, most populous city in the province, is getting one stop on this tour, equal to Medicine Hat and Lethbridge and Grand Prairie and Fort Mac, obviously much smaller centers. So will that alone skew the outcome of this? Because we know that on the issues, say, of separation, Calgarians feel differently based on your polling.
Look, as you know, I'm a big fan of the random sample. I think that's the way you get a truly accurate view on things. Now, this process is not really designed to attract a random sample of the population. If I was teaching a stats class, I talk about how, if you turn the porch light on at night, it's going to attract some bugs. And if you count the bugs it's going to attract, you're going to get a good sense of bugs that are attracted to the light, but you're not going to get a sense of the bugs that aren't attracted to the light. So the people who are showing up at this forum, I watched the Red Deer Forum, those people did not seem to be representative of Alberta, as I understand Alberta public opinion. They didn't even really seem to be representative of Red Deer. They're people who were attracted by this process. So the survey that's out there, I don't see it as really comparable to polling at all. It's a self-selected sample, you know, period.
Evan, you want to respond to any of that?
I certainly wouldn't criticize anything that Janet said. I think for the most part is correct. But if I were to add an exclamation mark to some of her comments, yeah, of course, the people who are most animated about these topics and subjects are the ones most likely to come up. But I would also mention those who are most critical of it. And we saw some of that at the Edmonton Forum, that this is an important opportunity to get involved in the process. You can be critical of things like citizen-initiated referenda, certainly a welcome debate on that, given some of the discussions we've been having around separation. You can be critical about a lot of these policies. But this is a big, wide open opportunity to get involved in the discussion. So yeah, the people who show up will be the ones who are most animated about some of these topics. But if you're certainly critical or not wanting to talk about these or go to a vote next year on some of these topics, this is definitely the time to get involved. And I think we saw in the Edmonton one, like it's an interesting dialogue that will occur with, you know, the leader of the province and the premier and those around her.
We're getting tight for time. I want to stay with you, Evan. I want you to pick up on something that Janet raised earlier when it comes to why Smith has launched this panel. So many pundits have said that it's about letting that steam off and placating elements of the UCP base out of fear that they could turn on her. That may be the case, but it implies that she wouldn't be taking these steps otherwise. What's your read on that? Is the base leading Smith to these ideas? A pension plan, police force, or is she the one doing the leading?
Well, that's a really interesting frame on the question. Like, yeah, I mean, it's politics, right? You need a governing coalition, and you need to be able to keep that coalition together to keep governing. And obviously, you know, you could look at through some of Janet's polling that's been released publicly, or other public opinion polls, and you can see quite clearly that it is the UCP base that are most animated about these issues. I would say that, yeah, there's the premier has a keen eye on making sure that her governing coalition stays together. I think she's personally interested and intrigued by some of these policy options, less so on some of them than others. But yeah, it's you know, in a democracy, there's going to be those points of where there are constituents who are at a boiling point, and you need to give them mechanisms and tools to get involved. And I certainly think that the premier's acknowledging that through these Alberta Next panels.
We're going to have to leave it there. Both of you making great points as usual. Thanks for this.